Kalafalava malolele. Warm Pacific greetings. It's raining currently in Fiji, but I hope that you can hear me well. It's been quite hot for the last few days, and that's some of the things that we're going through with climate change and all that. It's quite current. But anyway, my talk today is really about the winds of change, and I'm just going to ask, is this
Joseph?
Joseph, if you could just put up the slides. But thank you, Tracy, for the introduction, and it's good to see this forum come to life. Okay, so my presentation today is just really talking about what has been happening at the University of the South Pacific since I joined the university, which is in 2018, the beginning February last year. I am originally from Fiji. I'm indigenous to this country. And the University of the South Pacific, which I'll show you in a minute, covers a wide range of Pacific islands. I think just talking about that, you wouldn't really get a picture of that until I show you the actual picture of what we're covering here at the university. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was the rethinking of social work education in Oceania and how we include indigeneity as part of the training that we offer. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to give you an overview of the curriculum and what we had to do in terms of mapping our curriculum to include what I feel and what a group of us thought that is part of an indigenous foreground in indigenous knowledge or education at USP. The plans that we have for the future, currently it's a 3-year degree, and the plan is to move it into a 4-year degree. And how we include or become inclusive across Oceania, that's still the $64 million question, is how do we make it inclusive of the 12 countries that we serve across the Pacific. Okay, so the next slide, please. Next slide, please, Joseph.
Yep.
Okay.
Wait.
Nice. Okay, so this is just to give you a context of the 12 different countries that the University of South Pacific has. We have, Fiji is where the base is. So we cover all around the Pacific, which is Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, all the different countries you see there is included as part of the University of the South Pacific. So most of our teaching is face-to-face also here on the Fiji campus, but for the regional students, we have satellite lectures. Part of the lectures also that we have on campus are captured through lecture capture, and so students can download that and actually watch the lecture, and they can't see me, but they can hear my voice and they can actually see the slides. So at any one time in the satellite tutorial, we'll have the 12 nations beaming into the Laucala campus to actually watch us deliver the lecture. There is, in terms of the internet access, that's still a huge problem. We've switched into e-learning, but that's still a dimension that we're still trying to think of creative ways of working across the Pacific in these 12 different countries. Okay, so next slide, please.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, so you've seen that slide that Fiji is like the center of the universe there? I see Tracy laughing. Okay, so yes, so currently it's a BA degree and you have to do a major or minor. So there are only 12 social work courses in this. So my struggle is, how do I include theory, practice, and skills all in the current 12 papers that we have? That's the real issue for us. So what I'm finding is the way that it's offered, sometimes have to just do some of the problem-based learning or case studies that we go through. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. So the practice courses actually happens in year 2 and year 3. For second year students, they are only doing it for 200 hours, and for year 3, they just have to finish 250 hours of placement. You know, unlike the 4-year degrees where you have a whole semester where the students can do placement, we still have to consider that they are, some of them are majoring or have a minor in social work, so there are other courses that they have to deal with while they are doing social work. When I came into the program, a lot of the social work models of practice, well, it didn't exist. The social work models of practice didn't exist. Most of the things that they were learning are based on the you know, sociological and psychological frameworks. So that's about as basic as you can get. So, you know, I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So what does the revamping mean, and what does it mean in terms of introducing indigeneity? So we had to look at, by the way, there's only 2 of us in the team. When I say we, there's just 2 of us covering the 12 countries. So yes, we're really pressed with time here on this campus, but we had to think of creative ways to include indigeneity within the curriculum, but also to get the students to decolonize themselves and to have a critique about how that, you know, that speaking Samoan and speaking Tongan and speaking Tokelauan is really important to how you understand social work. So one of the first things that we looked at for first year is just the definition of social work, and what would be the equivalent words of social justice or social cohesion, all the words that are in the international social work, you know, that definition that we all know. What does that mean in your own language? And as a part of that, we've started a glossary. And, you know, I've got some of the beginning of those words when I was at Messi. We only had the Fijian, the Samoan, and the Tongan. So coming here, it's been really interesting and really empowering for the students to actually feel that their language can also be captured in the meaning of social justice or empowerment and things like that. So just in the last few classes that we've had and lectures and tutorials, I've found that, you know, just having them to think about those words from their own language is just it's just like a wake-up moment or a reawakening of who they are and their identity, and understanding that it is important to include their language in how they conduct social work. I'm talking about that because when I came into the program, the social work program is very, well, we all know that it comes from a Western construct, but the words that are being used, the languaging, the videos that they watch, the way that it's being taught was very Western academia frame of mind, sort of, so to speak. So we had to, even this thing about just the language itself, I found that that was just the beginning of what opened up, you know, a number of discussions across the 12 different countries on what is community development in my own language, or what is those definitions of social cohesion in their own language. It's interesting, but I don't have a way of checking if what they're telling me is correct or not correct. So, you know, that's another way that I'll probably have to work through in the future, is how do I actually validate that what they're talking about is valid. But just to have the discussion alone is just, you know, it's changed how we look at social work within the 12 countries. Okay, next please. Okay, so you know, this is quite boring, but I'm just going to go through each one and just well, you know, give you an overview of how we've changed some of it to include indigeneity within the curriculum. So part of the number one is, about applying, so we would like our students at the end of the program, they have about 8 graduate outcomes that they'll, we're hoping that they will accomplish. Initially, there was about 4. And again, I found that the 4, I should have shown you a slide of the 4, but I found that they were very limiting and restricted to Western ways of thinking. So I'm hoping that this new framework will allow the students themselves to come up with ways of thinking that, to talk about their indigeneity and how they work within the community, the things they value within the community, that matters within social work practice. So part of what we're doing currently is just even decolonizing the way that students think. I'll just give you an example of, we had a case study of a Samoan family, and I just wanted to tell the students, I told the students to role play how they would actually greet the family coming into a home. How would they greet the family? And I gave them a few minutes, and then they came back and actually did the role play. And not one of the groups actually said talofalava, which is the greeting in Samoa. And I was quite surprised. That took me by surprise. And I take it for granted, being in New Zealand, that that's the thing that most students would just come up with. But I'm in a university in the South Pacific where all my students are Indigenous students, yet none of them thinks that's an important component. There's still this thinking that English has to be used in order for it to be valid. So part of the process for me is just trying to get them to think, when you greet someone, it's okay for you to use talofalava or bulavanaka or malolele in their own Pacific language. So part of the languaging example that I gave you earlier is exactly that. It's just getting them to develop their own critical awareness of their languages and how it can be used in social work practice. Okay, so that's really the purpose of this slide, was just to talk about, how theoretical knowledge can be applied into actual social work practice and decision making. The models of practice that we're starting to introduce are some of the ones that I've learned from New Zealand. One of my own, which, it's just great that we could actually use that here in Fiji. Also, just getting all the regional students to realize that they could discuss and come up with the ways of working with communities or working in social work practice that's relevant for their communities or their group of people. All right, I'll go on to the next one. Yes, again, just very briefly on what we're trying to do. The last part there was from, we noticed that the students just lacked the skill for communicating. How do you do it within a Fijian community, a Samoan community, and all the regional countries? So that has been the dilemma. Which country do we choose? Because there's 12 different countries. So because we're from Fiji, we just teach within the Fiji, ways of knowing. But we actually ask the students to discuss how it's done within their own island countries. Right, I'll go on to the next slide. Okay, so just in terms of mapping, please don't get horrified when you see this, but this is part of what we had to do just to build in what we wanted the students to accomplish. It's a 3-year degree, so at first year, we're hoping that at the end of the first year, they're able to achieve that benchmark. And the second year, the milestone, and of course, the third year capstone. So again, it's just a lot of it is about including models of practice that are relevant for Indigenous or Pacific communities. If you look at PGO3, that's really about looking at the diverse communities within the Pacific and globally. So we not only study Pacific people here, but also what's relevant for transnational communities Pacific transnational communities across the world. All right, I'll go on to the next slide. Yes, so this is just the end of the graduate outcomes that I've talked about. So again, it's about allowing them to critically reflect in their own practice, and it's grounded by policy. So a lot of the funding that happens across the Pacific are guided by our commitment to all these MDGs and SDGs, right? So that's part of what the students really have to learn, and how, which declaration did their country sign, and how that impacts on the program that's being delivered within their own countries. So that's a huge part of how we have to configure our program to make it relevant. I know that even the SDGs is a Western thing, so even that in itself is a struggle. So we try to get them to critically think what would be relevant from their own communities or their own countries. All right, I'll go on to the next one, please. Okay, so these are the 4 goals that we're trying to improve on. So, one is just on teaching and learning. Maybe I'll go to the next slide to talk about all the different goals. But in a nutshell, those are the different goals that we're looking at. We just developed this at the end of last year, so it's still work in progress. I'll just go on to the next slide. I think in teaching and learning, I've already talked about, what we're doing. So including, making it relevant for all the Pacific countries, also getting them to talk about what it is like in their own countries, the language that they use, the values and communities, how that's established, etc. Yeah, I can go on to this. Oh, one of the things that we're having an issue with is in terms of placement, because we're dealing with regional countries. What has happened before is our regional countries students were kind of left on their own. So we're trying to build a network of alumni that have already graduated, but ensuring that within the competencies themselves, that there are cultural competencies that they have to achieve. My colleague, the 2 of us that's here, she's currently doing her research on what kind of cultural competencies needed to be included within this. And that's going to change for all the different countries. But once we talk to the other countries about what's working in Fiji, they probably could come up with their own on how that, what that's going to look like. We had initially had 3 staff, but we're down to 2. That's because there is really no one at PhD level. I'm the only one here in the Pacific, at USP, that's Indigenous and working here. So we're trying to develop pathways for our staff to get into that level. All right, the next one, please. Okay, so in terms of research capacity, that's almost none at the moment. So we've been working with Tracy on SWARG, trying to get our staff to publish and also just to try to do some research across the country. We've just been given we've just been commissioned to do a study on looking at child welfare across Fiji. That would help us think about, what's happening in our communities, the values, have they, why is there an increase in child abuse and sexual offenses and things like that within our communities here. I'll just go on to the next one. Yes, I didn't talk about the strategic goal 3 because it's part of what we're developing in-house. But for the 4th one, our plan is to move into a 4-year degree by 2021. And the way that this is done, because there's only 2 of us, we're thinking about collaborating with other universities to co-teach into the program. we've talked to people from the ministry and also within the industry, and they had already identified the priority areas, which is in disability, working with the elderly, and child welfare. That's the three most prevalent in the Pacific, or most urgent. So the fourth year program is really looking at doing theory in the first semester, and then having practice work in the second semester, but being co-taught with people from the industry or other universities. We're still thinking about developing a social work registration. We're not quite sure if that's the best way to go, but that's still being developed. One of the main things about that is that we're getting bombarded with a lot of other university students coming into Fiji and flooding some of the agencies where our students are supposed to be going. So if we have an a registration program, that could be a way of either stopping them or monitoring how they're using the organizations that we're all part of. One of the other things that we really need to do is just to develop collaboration with other universities, and I'm glad that this forum is here for, I just feel like that this could be a forum that we could talk about some of the things that we're experiencing and what it's like for you, introducing indigeneity within your curriculum. But for us, my dilemma is that it's 12 different countries that we're dealing with. So it's 12 different cultures. And which one do we include? So far, we've just been doing the Fiji one. But what that will look like for the other Pacific countries, I'm not quite sure. That's still work in progress, and it's developing as we speak. All right, so next one, please. Yeah, so some of the new initiatives that we're talking about this week, on Thursday, we're signing the MOU with our local ministry. That's the ministry where social services sits under. And part of this is not only to be able to exchange research work and things like that, but also to develop what we will consider as our registration process for our students and our social workers. Obviously, the competencies will be really important here. So, that's part of what we're trying to include in negotiating what's going to happen there. As far as the ministry is concerned, they're saying that most of our social work students, when they come on, they're still unsure how to write case notes and things like that. So they're saying that they want to give us their case studies of, so I'm like, yes, please bring the case studies. That'll work for us. But also for regional students, I just have to be aware that this will be just focused on Fiji. So how do we adapt it to also be generic enough, so to speak, to suit other students within the region? So the redesigning of the program, that's still current, that's ongoing. We've been getting help from Massey University and also the University of Western Sydney in their community development projects. So that's been working quite well. The field placement exercise, we're still trying to develop some of those cultural competencies that our students will need. That's an ongoing process. And to do that, we've invited people from the industry to actually help us come up with the competencies that's needed, because they've been working in the field and they would know better than we do. So I see the program as dependent on them, and they're dependent on us. So, I like the way that it's developing, that we're talking to each other, and that we're not offering anything at the university that is, we're getting them to be work ready, that is relevant to what the industry needs. I've talked about the 4-year program and the development of the registration. Okay, so next slide. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, so I just sent this poetry to Tracy as part of the abstract, because I felt that this kind of captures where we are at the moment. And I'll just read it for you. A strange wind is coming from the west. It smells of change. As it gently blows my hair, I feel my unanswered questions fade. I don't remember them anymore. The answers don't matter. A tickling feeling over my face makes my bare skin come to life when I know that it is my very soul that is actually awaking from a long, deep sleep. Winds have changed. Now I know have been long waiting for you. I'm ready. Yes, so that's how I feel now. I'm ready to take this on. It's a lot of work. But it's exciting and it's challenging. But I look forward to maybe learning from you on what has worked in your own countries.
Inakalitea for sharing about your experience there at the University of the South Pacific. We have with us here members from Japan and Malaysia, possibly other places too. And so would welcome questions and comments at this stage about that presentation from our participants in the webinar now. Please, when you